I bring greetings from the free state of Florida. I should note that Florida has a special connection to the National Conservatism Conference. It has played host to the conference on 2 prior occasions, once in Orlando and once in Miami. And Governor DeSantis has spoken at the conference as well. I do feel like the conference is cheating on us a little bit by having it here this year. Nevertheless, I am pleased to carry on that relationship and hope that the conference returns to Florida soon. Wouldn't you much prefer looking at the ocean than the DC and smog? It is fitting that the National Conservatism Conference has made the problem of corporations versus conservatives a topic of discussion. The rise of modern, multinational, widely held business corporations presents yet another challenge to nation states that are already besieged by tribalism from within and globalism from without. If the aim of conservatism is to conserve the political creed, national customs, language, history, religious traditions, material prosperity, and general welfare of the nation, to preserve the natural rights and moral virtue of its people, and to ensure justice among its people. And I believe that is the proper aim of any version of conservatism worth its salt. Then the widely held for-profit corporation is a potential threat to those ends that no conservatives should allow to go unaddressed. Let me pause at the outset to note that not all corporations are created equal, which is to say that not all corporations are similarly situated. Many corporations, as John pointed out, are standing for profit, but many are not. And as to for-profit corporations, many are closely held, which means that they are owned by an individual or small group of shareholders whose shares are not publicly traded, but many are widely held, which means that they are owned by a large group of shareholders whose shares are publicly traded. My concern here is with the widely held, publicly traded, for-profit corporation. Unlike non-profit corporations, which are formed for specific purposes, for-profit business corporations are permitted to incorporate for any lawful purpose. In other words, they need not specify any purpose at all. And unlike closely held corporations where the individual owner or small group of shareholders have meaningful control over the direction of the corporation, the widely held publicly traded corporation is controlled not by the shareholders, but by a board of directors and corporate executives who are agents of the corporation. But considered in light of the large amount of capital that widely held publicly traded corporations are able to amass, the lack of any specific business purpose that is binding on management, combined with the lack of any meaningful shareholder control, means that corporate managers are able to use the substantial resources of their corporations with good oversight to wield significant power and influence in the life of our people. And as these corporations expand their operations overseas and accumulate foreign investors, they become multinational corporations with the potential to transcend altogether a nation state that gave them birth. I do not question for a moment the economic utility of publicly traded for-profit corporations. Without a doubt, these corporations have made possible the capital accumulation, collective action, and risk-taking necessary to undertake large-scale economic activities in the industrial age that further the prosperity of the nation and the world. But notwithstanding their undeniable economic benefits, publicly traded corporations are nonetheless a potential danger to the conservative project of preserving the nation's political ideals and institutions, the nation's customs and religious traditions, and the people's natural rights, moral virtues, and general welfare. For one thing, they are a potential threat to Republican self-government. Corporations, of course, do not vote. That does not mean that the managers of large corporations do not wield political and social influence, far surpassing that of most voters. Indeed, why would the likes of Apple or Amazon, which have annual revenues greater than most governments on the planet, want to vote when they can use their vast resources to directly lobby to control governments, threaten states with boycotts, and shape public opinion through political expression of their own charitable contributions to employment practices, advertising and marketing, and in the case of big tech, outright censorship. Even at a time when business corporations were rare in this country, Thomas Jefferson recognized the danger when he warned about the, quote, moneyed corporations which dare already to challenge our government to a trial of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country. Several decades later, as the great trusts proliferated, Justice John Marshall Harlan issued a similar warning against, quote, combinations governed entirely by the law of greed and selfishness that are so powerful that no single state is able to overthrow them, and so all-pervading that they threaten the integrity of our institutions. And several decades after that, as chain stores began to overtake small businesses, Justice Louis Brandeis, and I never thought I was your favorite Justice Louis Brandeis, but he warned that, quote, size alone gives to giant corporations a social significance not attached ordinarily to smaller units of private enterprise. He went on to explain, and I'm going to quote that link because I think it's so good. Through size, corporations have become an institution which has brought such concentration of economic power that so-called private corporations are sometimes able to dominate the state. The typical business corporation of the last century, owned by a small group of individuals, managed by their owners, and limited in size by their personal wealth, is being supplanted by huge concerns in which the lives of tens or hundreds of thousands of employees and the property of tens or hundreds of thousands of investors are subjected through the corporate mechanism to the control of a few men. Ownership has been separated from control, and this separation has removed many of the checks which formerly operated to curb the misuse of wealth and power. And as ownership of the shares is becoming continually more dispersed, the power which formerly accompanied ownership is becoming increasingly concentrated in the hands of the few. Corporate managers are expected, indeed, I believe they have a fiduciary duty to maximize the economic value of the corporation for the benefit of its shareholders. This means that when left to their own devices, publicly traded corporations, merely by virtue of their purpose and structure, can become a threat to the non-economic values, interests, and principles of the nation that conservatives have historically sought to conserve. For instance, it may well be in the financial interest of a corporation to offshore the manufacture of some light good, say microchips or pharmaceutical precursors, but it is probably not in the social or national security interests of the nation to do so. I'm sure that large media companies make enormous sums of money peddling vulgar and obscene music and movies to young people. Can anyone honestly say that this serves the nation's interest in the moral virtue of its people? And can we expect sacrificial patriotism from a widely held corporation with operations and investors in countries around the globe, including potential competitors and adversaries? Of course not. But at least these trade-offs are understandable, given the economic purposes that the business corporation is created to serve. A corporation acting solely in its economic interests, even at the cost of other important interests, is the price we at least expect to pay for the significant economic benefits that flow from the corporation. That is not the case, however, when a publicly traded corporation seeks to serve interests other than the shareholders' interests for non-economic goods. The separation of ownership from control has been exploited by corporate executives to pursue the interests of perceived stakeholders other than the shareholders. And these efforts have increasingly served left-wing or woke causes that have no direct relevance to the business of the corporation. Causes such as abortion, voting rights, gun control, criminal justice, immigration, racial equity, gay rights, transgender rights, and in the case of Disney in Florida, classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in elementary schools. Large brand name corporations finance many of these causes through their charitable giving. They wield considerable cultural influence through their DEI policies and practices, including workplace training and initiatives that push this ideology. Some companies even evaluate their employees based on their participation in and commitment to DEI programs. Others have fired or forced out employees, usually conservatives, for off-the-job, politically incorrect comments or activities. At the same time, many large corporations advertise, sell merchandise, and otherwise promote branding and sponsorships associated with the woke agenda. They have threatened to boycott states that enact laws at odds with this agenda. And they have even canceled or censored their own customers in furtherance of this agenda. So-called stakeholder capitalism has turned out to be a Trojan horse for the woke cultural revolution. The captains of industry and finance in this country have shared their bourgeois values, donned their revolutionary cockades, and become captains of the revolution. How then do we solve the problem of large for-profit corporations, by which I mean their tendency to undermine the vital non-economic principles, values, and interests of the nation that conservatives hope to preserve, especially now that corporate managers have unleashed themselves from the constraint of economic self-interest? Well, as it turns out, the answer was given by James Wilson, the only man to sign the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and serve on the United States Supreme Court, roughly two centuries ago. Observing that in too many instances, and these are his words, those bodies politic, by which he meant corporations, have in their progress counteracted the design of the original formation. In other words, to the extent that a corporation is acting contrary to its original purposes, he advised that they, quote, should be directed with caution, and here's the important part, inspected with care. It turns out that Justice Brandeis was right when he wrote the following in his 1933 dissent to the invalidation of a Florida anti-chain store law that sought to protect local small businesses. He wrote, "The prevalence of the corporation in America has led men of this generation to act at times as if the privilege of doing business in the corporate form were inherent in the citizen, and has led them to accept the evils attendant upon the free and unrestricted use of the corporate mechanism, as if these evils were the inescapable price of civilized life, and hence to be borne with resignation." Throughout the greater part of our history, a different view prevailed. Any response to the problem of large business corporations must begin by recalling what too many conservatives seem to have forgotten, that corporations are not the moral equivalent of an individual person, and that they are certainly not above the people. They are answerable to the people's representatives and subject to regulation by them. Indeed, corporations are creatures of the people's representatives, and they owe every privilege they have to the state. They exist, and Con quoted this famous passage, but they exist, as Chief Justice Marshall told us 2 centuries ago, only in contemplation of law. And being the mere creature of law, they possess only those properties which the charter of their creation confers upon them, either expressly or as incidental to their very existence. And to the extent corporations have any constitutional rights at all, those rights at the very least are derivative of the natural rights of the actual flesh and blood people who own the corporation. And so the nature and scope of corporate constitutional rights should be determined by the precise nature of the corporation, its purpose, and its structure. So for instance, nonprofit and closely held corporations perhaps should have robust free speech and free exercise rights. But widely held, publicly traded corporations perhaps shown. Whatever the case may be, it has become more and more evident to me, as Teddy Roosevelt observed at the dawn of the 20th century, that the state, and if necessary the nation, has got to possess the right of supervision and control as regards the great corporations that are its interests. If corporate managers insist on exercising the formidable power of their corporations to intimidate legislatures and elected officials, deplatform and cancel their customers and employees, and finance ideological crusades with shareholder money, then the people acting through their representatives should employ all lawful means to prevent or deter it. The market will not necessarily save us from these corporate abuses. Publicly traded corporations, for example, should be required to publicize information, stop their charitable contributions. Anti-discrimination laws should be rigorously enforced to stem down PEI and end race-based targeting promotion, and to prohibit racially hostile work environments where employees are subjected to Orwellian anti-racism treaty as a condition of employment. Publicly traded corporations should also be barred from taking any adverse employment action or from penalizing or canceling any customers solely for expressing otherwise constitutionally protected political or religious views or for exercising other constitutionally protected rights like the right to bear arms. State contracts, pension funds, and other investments should be unavailable to corporations or asset managers whose policies do not align with the interests of the state. State legislatures should generally close loopholes and eliminate special privileges for corporations, as the Florida legislature did with Disney's Metro District. And perhaps corporations should even be barred from lobbying government officials on issues, especially those related to corporate business, without shareholder at least or approval. And social media platforms that only host the speakers should be subject to consumer protection regulation that prevents unfair citizenship or deplatforms should confess that I'm dismayed by the recent Supreme Court decision that may make this option a little bit difficult, although I do think there are some things that we have to get on. In short, as Justice Byron White put it, the state need not permit its own creation to consume it. While the great majority of Americans generally lack the resources and unity of action to counter the influence of powerful corporations, they do have the power of their atoms. And without power, they leave it to their elected representatives to prevent these corporations, which have been permitted to amass wealth as a result of special advantages extended by the state for certain economic purposes, from using that wealth to undermine the principles, values, and interests of our nation. As President Calvin Coolidge famously said, the chief business of the American people is business. But what is often forgotten is that he also said, in the very same speech, that while we want wealth, there are many other things that we want very much more. We want peace and honor and that charity, which is so strong an element of all civilization. To be sure, we want our large corporations to be successful in further the material prosperity of our people. But we also want to govern ourselves to ensure justice and security for our people and to preserve our political institutions and principles, our traditions and culture. Where the interests of corporations collide with these interests, our representative institutions should have the leading role in striking the balance, consistent, of course, with the Constitution properly understood, not necessarily just the Supreme Court that's interpreted. That is the solution, I believe, to the corporations versus conservatism problem. But simply waiting and hoping for the market to cut us will no longer do. And thank you.